In this video, I want to show you how to approach and solve exercises and also show you some common errors when dealing with code exercises. And what I'll actually do is I'll go through and solve one exercise for you in this video and the next one. So what we need to do first is create a new empty project in IntelliJ, this time without a template. So with IntelliJ open, create a new project. And I'm going to select Java if it's not already selected. And I'm not going to use the project option. And we're going to call this one Speed Converter. Alright, and I'll finish that. And that'll give us basically an empty project to start with. Alright, so let's now have a look at the exercise. I'll just close this down. We'll swing over and check out the exercise. This is the Speed Converter exercise. And this is coming up in the next lesson after these two videos. So what I would suggest you do is you leave this open in another tab while watching this video so you can come back to it. So in terms of what we're trying to do here, we want to write a method called 2 miles per hour that has one parameter of type double. And that parameter should have the name kilometers per hour. Now the method needs to return the rounded value of the calculation of type long. Now if the parameter kilometers per hour is less than 0, the method 2 miles per hour needs to return -1, and that indicates that the value passed was an invalid value. Otherwise, if it is a positive, this is the parameter value passed to the method, then we need to calculate the value of miles per hour, we need to round that value and then return it. And for conversion and rounding, check the notes in the text below, which we'll talk about shortly. So that's one method that we have to write. And then below that, if we scroll down here, above the window where we put in our code, you've got some examples there of the input and output. Basically what happens when we call the method, the argument or the parameter that we're passing to that, and what the result should be. Now I'm not going to read all those examples, but you should actually read them carefully. Now as you can see, the class name is Speed Converter, and that's also the file name. So let's jump back to IntelliJ. We're going to create some files for this exercise. So we'll go back. So the first thing we need to do now is create a new class. And again, the name is going to be Speed Converter. And we do that by right-clicking on the SRC folder, New, Java class, and we're going to call this one Speed Converter. And we're also going to create another class called Main. And in that class, we can put our main method so that we can test our code in IntelliJ before submitting the solution back on the code exercises web browser screen. So I'm going to right click on the source folder again, New, Java class again. And as I mentioned, I'm going to call it Main with a capital M. And you can see we've now got our two classes showing in the left-hand corner. All right, so let's start working on the Speed Converter class. We're going to add that first method. So I'm going to double click that to bring that back up on the screen. And if you recall, the first sentence in the exercise said, write a method called 2 miles per hour that has one parameter of type double with the name kilometers per hour and needs to return a rounded value of the calculation of type long. So to create the method signature, we're going to type public static long, and 2 miles per hour is the name of the method. And the parameter is of type double, and it's called kilometers per hour. Okay, and we'll add our left and right curly braces as normal for a method. All right, so firstly, we need to check that invalid value. And if you recall, we said that if the parameter kilometers per hour is less than 0, then this method 2 miles per hour needs to return a -1 to indicate that that value that was passed to this method was an invalid value. Otherwise, if it is positive, we need to calculate the value of that miles per hour argument, round it and return it. All right, so let's start by writing the code to test for invalid values. So I'm going to type if parentheses kilometers per hour, closing parentheses, and we'll add a code block there, left and right curly braces. So actually what I'll do is I'll finish that off first. We didn't finish the expression. There should be less than 0. So if it's less than 0, then what we want to do is return on the next line -1. Right, so that's handling the fact now that we've got an invalid value. Now looking back at the text, if we go back and check that out again, the text didn't specifically mention yet how to convert kilometers per hour into miles per hour. Now, you could use the Google converter to find out the conversion, but let's first move on to the next sentence. And we're going to scroll down a little bit. You can see that this second step here is to write another method called print conversion with one parameter of type double with the name kilometers per hour. Now that method shouldn't return anything, in other words void, it's void, and it needs to calculate the miles per hour from the kilometers per hour parameter. And you can see that it needs to print out a message in the format XX kilometers or km/h equals YY space MI/h, and XX represents the original value passed to the method kilometers per hour. YY represents the rounded miles per hour from the kilometers per hour parameter. And we've got a test there as well. If the parameter kilometers per hour is less than 0, then we want to print the text invalid value. And scrolling down a bit further, we've got some examples of input and output for that second method. And I won't read these examples, but I certainly suggest you do that. And moving on down a little bit further after that, you can see there's text and an example of how to use the round method. This is the math.round method I'm talking about. And basically, that's math is an inbuilt class that comes with Java and enables us to perform various mathematical calculations. And in this scenario here, you can see how it rounds the number 1.5. If we go down and have a look at the usage there, that's the sample usage of it. And if we scroll down, we can see the output. So getting the input up here of 1.5, we can see we're defining that on line 1, and long rounded equals on line 2. And if we come down here and look at the output, rounded equals 2. So basically what I'm saying there is we pass 1.5, the round function will round it up to 2. 3.9 is another example there. You can see it's rounded up to 4. 4.5 is rounded up to 5, and so on. So we'll go back shortly to IntelliJ and we'll see that in operation. And just going down a little bit further to read these tips here. In the method print conversion, call the method to miles per hour instead of duplicating the code. And we'll see that working and what that means shortly. And as a note there, all the methods should be defined as public static. And you saw me define that first method like that. And that's because we've been using public static so far in the course. And a note here that 1 mile per hour is 1.609 kilometers per hour. And finally, note there, do not add a main method to the solution code. Right, so at this point we now know how to convert kilometers per hour into miles per hour, and also how to round the result. All we have to do is divide the parameter kilometers per hour by 1.609. So let's jump back now to IntelliJ and finish the first method. All right, so I'm going to come down and add some code here on the next line. Add some code here. We're going to type long miles per hour is equal to, then I'm going to type math with a capital M, and notice you can see that's inbuilt to Java. It's a math class. If I type the period or the dot, you can see that IntelliJ has helpfully popped up or shown a pop-up with all the available methods. Now all these methods you can see are built-in methods that we can use, and we know now by looking at the notes that we want to use the round function. So I'm going to type in the first few letters of round, noting you can see that there's two versions of that, one that accepts a float and also one that accepts a double. So I'm going to select the second one, but it doesn't really matter which one you choose there. Then within the parameters, I'm going to type, within the parentheses, I'm going to type kilometers per hour, then divided by 1.609, which is the calculation to convert kilometers back to miles. I'm going to close off that line as I normally do with the right parentheses and then semicolon. Then I'm going to type return miles per hour. Right, so you can see there that we're using the round method. Math, again, is a class that contains many useful mathematical methods that you can use in your code. It's inbuilt and comes as part of Java. The round method that we're using here will round the double that we're passing to this method. And as a note, we're saying it's going to return a long. And we're obviously defined a long on line 9, and we're getting the value of the math.round function returned into the miles per hour variable. So as you can see here, to call a method from another class, we have to write the class name, in this case math, and then the dot method name, as we've done that on line 9. Now you'll learn more about classes and how you can create your own classes later in the course. But at this point, that completes our first method. Now, if you are eagle-eyed, you'd probably notice that IntelliJ is showing a warning on our variable miles per hour. You can see it's highlighted on line 9. If I hover over that, you can see there it's saying that the local variable, miles per hour, is redundant. Now that's because we're only using this local variable that we've defined on line 9 for returning the result of our calculation. instead of using a variable, we can use the return statement right away with a calculation or an expression. Now that will also return the result, but the code is shorter and we also don't then need a local variable. So let's remove the variable and just use return on the same line as the calculation, and that will also, by definition, remove this warning. So I'm just going to delete that first part of the code and just change that so it says return, and the next line is no longer needed. I'm going to delete that, and you can see the warning has now disappeared. In this case, the code will work exactly the same as before. First, the calculation or expression is executed. So this is the part that basically is to the right of the return keyword. So that's still going to be calculated first. Once it's calculated, it will then automatically be returned whatever the value is of that calculation to the method that calls this 2 miles per hour method, and we'll see that in the next video. Alright, so that's the first method, so we'll end the video here. In the next video, we'll continue on and we'll write our second method. See you in the next video.